I think it's ridiculous that we're having like a rational conversation and debate here about theology, because the insane, decrepit, senile old man who's in the White House is posting pictures of himself, posing like Jesus, and attacking the Pope. This is, and I think it's rather rich and ridiculous and ironic for J.D. Vance, who is the vice president, to the president who is the least careful with words in my lifetime in this country.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Voter's Viewpoint. We've got a heated panel moment here with Scott Jennings and Ana Navarro, and this one cuts straight into the chaos around Donald Trump, religion, and political spin. What makes this clip stand out is how fast the debate stops being about theology and starts becoming about something much bigger. Whether Trump's defenders will condemn anything at all, even something this extreme. You can feel the frustration building because the issue is not complicated. The Pope speaks on war and peace. Trump posts inflammatory images and attacks him. Then the usual MAGA cleanup operation begins. If you want more sharp political breakdowns like this, hit like and subscribe. It helps push this analysis further. Now let's get into it.
Suddenly, Republicans don't want religion in politics. President Trump's war of words with the Pope is again escalating, but this time it's his allies that are doing the talking. For days, President Trump has criticized the Pope for speaking out against the Iran war, which has received bipartisan backlash. And then, of course, he added fuel to the fire when he posted a picture depicting himself as Jesus. He posted another picture today, but this time he is alongside AI Jesus. The Pope continues to advocate for peace, even doing so again tonight, while Republican officials are lecturing him on all things theology and doctrine.
Now, we can, of course, have disagreements about whether this or that conflict is just, but I think that it's important, in the same way that it's important for the Vice President of the United States to be careful when I talk about matters of public policy, I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. Well, you've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth.
The Pope needs to keep his business into leading his flock, so to speak, leading the church, and probably stay out of the political arena. He doesn't need to be getting involved in the political arena. Go lead your church. I didn't elect the Pope to be president.
A pontiff or any religious leader can say anything they want, but obviously if you wade into political waters, I think you should expect some political response, and I think the Pope's received some of that.
It's not clear when a life and death war became just politics. But here we are in this moment for the church and state and war. I mean, since when are popes told they can't talk about war, they can't talk about peace, they can't talk about people who are dying and people who are living all around the world?
Since the beginning of the year of our Lord, popes have talked about peace, whether they were in war times, we were in war times, or peace times. Popes talk about peace. This Christmas, I will get dozens, if not more, of cards that say, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. I'm not really sure what is going on in this country, but we have a lot going on. And to say the Pope needs to be careful when he's discussing theology just makes no sense to me. It just really doesn't. The Pope is doing what popes do. And, the president wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He talks about wars that he's stopped around the world. Isn't that about peace? So I'm not sure what we're doing.
Remember, he doesn't need the Nobel Peace Prize. He already got that prize from FIFA.
As a practicing Catholic, I know that the Vatican doesn't operate in our political paradigm. It's in the divine spiritual realm. So when the Pope sounds like the UN spokesperson saying no confrontation, no conflict, only peacekeeping, only diplomacy, that is totally normal. However, we learned this lesson with Pope Francis, who waded into politics probably more than any other pope before him, at least in terms of our modern politics. You do have to care about precision and exactitude as the successor to Peter, as someone who is informing the opinions of so many lay Catholics. So when you say, as the Pope, and I say this as a practicing Catholic, that God does not hear the prayers of those who wage war, that is a bit precarious and does risk confusing practicing Catholics, because does that mean the war to fight Hitler in World War II, was that unjustified? The war against the Soviet Union, was that unjustified? I'm just saying that to say that he should be a little bit more precise, that's not like this.
Okay, but it's rather rich. It's rather rich for...
Before you jump in, Anna, there is actual clarity from the Catholic Church on this, to your point. And the Bishop James Massa, the Doctrine Committee Chair, so this is straight from the Catholic Church, says, a constant tenet of that 1,000-year tradition is a nation can only legitimately take up the sword in self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. That is, to be a just war, it must be a war of defense against another who actively wages war, which is what the Holy Father actually said. quote, he does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. So it continues, when Pope Leo speaks as supreme pastor of the Universal Church, he is not merely offering opinions on theology. He is preaching the gospel and exercising his ministry as the vicar of Christ. So he's basically saying, in fewer words, the Pope is teaching the gospel. He is speaking literally what the just war theory is. And I guess my question to you is, do you think that J.D. Vance knows more about Catholic theology than the Pope?
Well, I hear what you're saying about just war theory. That was created by St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine. And what you're saying is that it has to be proportionate to the
I'm
actual
not saying
threat.
It, just to be clear.
No, that is what just war theory is. But it's also up to lay Catholics, according to the Vatican II Council, Second Vatican Council, to decide what that means for temporal matters. Just because the Pope makes some sort of dictate on political issues, that's not a religious proclamation.
I too am a Catholic, not a very flawed one. Granted, when I go to church, it should burst into flames. But here's what I know. In my lifetime, I've known no Pope that has more political involvement than John Paul II. He was part of a triumvirate with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in beating communism. He did things like show up in Cuba. He did things like show up in Nicaragua and confront the Sandinistas to their face. So popes have always been political. It comes with a job. I do think that the job of U.S. president and the job of pope are two completely different things, and each of them is speaking to their constituent. I think it's ridiculous that we're having a rational conversation and debate here about theology, because the insane, decrepit, senile old man who's in the White House is posting pictures of himself, posing like Jesus, and attacking the Pope. This is, and I think it's rather rich and ridiculous and ironic for J.D. Vance, who is the vice president, to the president who is the least careful with words in my lifetime in this country, the man who celebrates death of Rob Reiner and Bob Mueller, the man who cusses on Easter Sunday. For now, J.D. Vance wants people to be careful with their words, or maybe he should tell the guy he works for.
Does she have a point about that? Why, first of all, why criticize the Pope and say, you better be careful with your discussion of theology and your use of words, when he doesn't care whether or not his own boss is careful with his words?
Yeah, I heard the vice president there. I actually think he had it backwards. I think that the Pope should be talking about theology. I respect the Pope's role in running the Catholic Church, and I also respect Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's role in American politics. That's their realm in which to be speaking their mind. And so I thought he had it backwards. It's interesting that you referenced Pope John Paul II and President Reagan. I was thinking about this this evening. There's a tremendous opportunity here for this Pope. If he would look at it this way, we're in the middle of a ceasefire. This blockade is working. There are no bombs falling. There's diplomacy going on right now. And there is a real chance, because of what Trump has done and the situation we find ourselves in, for the world to bring pressure, economic pressure, and diplomatic pressure, just like what was done in the 80s, to bear against this terrorist regime, just the way it was brought to bear against the Soviets in the 1980s. And so I get the feeling sometimes the Pope might be feeling a little adversarial, at least in some of his comments toward President Trump. I don't know that personally. It's my sense of it. But in this moment where you have, there's no bombs falling right now. There's a blockade. There's some restraint going on, and there's talks going on. This, to me, is a moment where you could have a partnership for peace in a way that brings this terrorist regime that, by the way, has been at war with the West for nearly 50 years to its knees. And I think just the way they brought the Soviets to their knees, it could happen right here.
Don't you think that opportunity goes both ways? In other words, it's also an opportunity for the President of the United States to cultivate an alliance with the leader of the Catholic Church and other foreign leaders, frankly, because what he's done by taking on the Pope is not just antagonize Catholics. He's antagonized people like his ally Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, where the Vatican is.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question.
The Reagan, John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher thing was years of cultivation of relationships.
But this is a moment.
In the morning tweets.
But this is a moment.
It's irrational what he's doing, and you know it.
Well, it's not irrational to stand up to the Iranians.
It's irrational to be posting.
It's not irrational. But we're in a moment.
Is it rational to threaten a genocide of 90 million people? Is that rational, Scott? To threaten a genocide of 90 million people on Easter Sunday?
That didn't happen.
What entire civilization?
Let me live in reality today.
Let me just reiterate to the audience. The president said in a message that an entire civilization may die tonight.
On Easter Sunday.
He said that. So a lot of people read that as him threatening to wipe out an entire civilization. So the Pope it does seem like the Pope would actually be rational to respond to that, and to say, hey, we shouldn't be in the business of war. And I think you're right that I'm sure the Pope is happy that there is a ceasefire, but he was responding to Trump waging a war. Does he not have a right to respond to that part of it too?
He has a right to say whatever he wants, but I would just say we're waging war against people who've been waging war against us for nearly 50 years. And look, the reality is, and the moment that we're in is special because we've got this regime on its knees economically, which has China. That's a problem for them as well. We've got a moment here where we can change something and change a situation that's been bad for tens of millions of people for going on 5 decades now. And I just, my hope, look, by the way, a lot of politicians in America disagree with the Pope. Do you guys agree with the Pope about abortion and gay marriage?
Well, let me say this.
The answer is no. And that's okay.
Hold on a
that's okay. It happens all the time.
But we all should agree with the Pope on
a lot of people, not everybody's a Catholic. A lot of people disagree with
Donald
the Pope.
Trump's not a Catholic.
Hold on a second. A lot of people disagree with the Pope on a lot of doctrines.
And he was not in line.
But hang on just a second. Before we go down that road, because we also know that Donald Trump supported abortion before he opposed it. But also,
he's been the most pro-life president we've ever had.
The response when you disagree with the Pope is very different from what Donald Trump did. What Trump said was, the Pope is weak on crime. The Pope,
that part.
He's insulting the man rather than just saying,
I agree with you. That's not whitewash what actually happened. You don't measure the Pope by those political metrics.
That's one of the most interesting things.
Hold on, Carolyn. I'm not understanding. I mean, I'm just saying Trump's response to his disagreement is not what anybody else's response is. Rather than just saying, we disagree, the Pope is, he's a figure of the church. I respect his opinion. We agree to disagree. He insulted the Pope. He attacked him repeatedly on social media. That is not anybody else, frankly.
I agree with you that there was antagonism. But what I'm trying to also say is that they both fueled the fire. And if you look at what...
Excuse me?
To say that any war is unjustified, Abby, do you really believe that?
For the Pope most Americans would agree with that.
Let me just play... Let me play...
What prompted this war?
What stands out in this exchange is not just that Scott Jennings and Ana Navarro disagree, it is that they are operating on two completely different standards of accountability. Ana is asking a simple question. If Donald Trump posts inflammatory religious imagery and publicly attacks the Pope, will any of his defenders just say that it is wrong? Not complicated, not abstract, not some impossible theological puzzle, just wrong. And what happens? The conversation immediately gets dragged into the usual MAGA escape hatch. Change the subject. Reframe the issue. Pretend the real problem is the response. Never squarely condemn the conduct itself. That is the pattern. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because this is never just about one post. It is about a political culture where Trump can do almost anything, and his defenders will still. Treat the real issue as the reaction to it, not the act itself. That is what Ana is pressing on, and that is why the exchange gets so tense. Now, look at the religious angle. The Pope speaking about war and peace is not some bizarre overreach. Religious leaders have spoken on war, morality, human suffering, and political power for centuries. That is part of the role. So when Trump allies suddenly act as if the Pope should stay silent the moment he says something politically inconvenient, it looks exactly like what it is: selective respect. They respect religious authority when it flatters their politics. They dismiss it when it challenges their politics. That is not principle. That is convenience. And that is where the hypocrisy really comes into focus. The same movement that constantly demands deference to Christianity in public life suddenly becomes very nervous about religion in politics. When the religious voice is not serving their agenda, suddenly it is. Stay in your lane. Suddenly it is. Be careful with theology. Suddenly it is. The Pope should not comment on matters touching war and state power. Come on. They do not object to religion entering politics. They object to religion confronting power they like. That is the real issue here. Now take the Trump part of this more directly. Trump's style has always been the same. Personal insult over argument. Provocation over discipline. Dominance over persuasion. So when Phillip presses on why Trump attacks the Pope rather than simply disagreeing, that matters. Because disagreement is normal. Public life is full of disagreement. But Trump does not merely disagree. He He humiliates, mocks, escalates, and demands submission. That is how he operates with opponents, allies, institutions, judges, reporters, and now even religious figures. And Jennings, like so many others in that orbit, is left trying to rationalize behavior that is plainly irrational on its face. That is where Ana lands her best point. The problem is not that people disagree with the Pope. Plenty of Catholics and non-Catholics disagree with the Pope on many things. The problem is the form of the response. Trump does not handle disagreement like an adult in public office. He handles it like a man who thinks every disagreement is disloyalty. That is not strength. That is insecurity dressed up as dominance, and it has poisoned political culture for years. Now step back and look at why this kind of segment matters. Used a panel fight. It is a demonstration of how authoritarian political habits spread through media. One man at the top acts without restraint, and everyone beneath him learns to defend the indefensible. Not because the defense makes sense, not because the facts are on their side, but because the movement now runs on loyalty first. That is why Ana's frustration feels real. It is not only about one social media post, it is about watching the same routine play out over and over. Trump crosses a line. His defenders deny the obvious. The discussion gets buried under spin. Basic standards disappear. And once basic standards disappear, democracy starts taking damage in ways people do not always notice at first. Because healthy politics depends on something very simple. There must be lines that still exist, even when your side crosses them. There must be moments when people say, yes, that was too far. Yes, that was reckless. Yes, that was beneath the office. But Trumpism has trained too many people out of that reflex. Everything becomes negotiable. Every outrage becomes explainable. Every insult becomes strategy. And that is how political rot deepens. Now, one thing this clip also shows very clearly is the difference between argument and evasion. Ana is pressing the actual conduct. Jennings keeps trying to widen the frame until the original issue disappears. That is not an answer. That is an escape route. And viewers need to get sharper at seeing that in real time. When someone will not answer the obvious question, pay attention. When someone has to build 10 layers of justification around conduct that should be easy to condemn, pay attention. When someone treats plain language as the threat instead of the behavior being described, pay attention. That is where the truth usually is. The bigger political problem here is that Trump keeps testing whether any institution still has the strength to resist total personalization of power. The courts, the press, elections, the military, religious authority. Everything gets dragged into his image and his ego. Everything becomes about him. Even faith gets turned into spectacle. And that should disturb people far beyond party lines. Because once politics becomes a theater of permanent ego management, there is very little room left for humility, restraint, or moral seriousness. And if there is one area where those things should still matter, it is when leaders are talking about war, peace, life, death, and religion. That is why this exchange lands. Not because it is loud, because it reveals something real. It reveals how brittle these defenses are when somebody refuses to let them slide. It reveals how much of modern MAGA argument is built on excuse-making. And it reveals that the minute Trump is challenged by any moral authority he cannot control, his people scramble to discredit the authority rather than confront the behavior. That tells you everything. If this breakdown helped you see what was really happening in that panel, hit the like button and subscribe to the Voters' Viewpoint. It helps push fact-based political analysis to more people who are tired of the spin. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Ana right to press the issue the way she did, or do you think Jennings had a real defense? Stay informed, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.